The 94th edition of the Roy's Boys podcast starts right now.
It's not about you. It's about that name on the front of your jersey.
And ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. Pushes into Hubert Davis. 8 seconds. Davis trying to get free. Over to Fox. Fox, baseline. Up for the shot. Good. Off the glass. Oklahoma calls timeout. But the game is over. The game is over. Carolina has upset number 1 Oklahoma.
With 20 seconds left to play. Goes back to Michael Jordan. Jumper from out on the left. Good. 63-62, 13, 12, 11. Georgetown with one timeout. Fred Brown looking. Oh, way to Worthy. Worthy 5. The Tar Heels are going to win the national championship.
Rebounded by Weber. Michigan out of timeout. Weber front court. Carolina with foul. He takes the timeout. They're out of timeout. Technical foul. Technical foul. Brown gets it into Williams. Here comes Williams front court. Williams on the drive. Gets it back out the head. Long outside shot. Short rebounded. There. It's over. Carolina has won the national championship. How about them Tar Heels? They are the national champions.
That's it! Make room for 2017. The Tar Heels are the national daggum champions.
That's what it's all about right there. That's on the floor, that's on your shirt, that's in your heart. That's why we're all here.
This is the Roy's Boys podcast with your host, Joshua Marlowe.
Hey everybody, welcome you into another edition of the Roy's Boys podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. We hope that you had a great Christmas holiday with your family. Hope Santa Claus treated you very well. But now with the holidays coming to an end, basketball season is about to pick right back up. And with that, I'm going to welcome in my co-host, Anthony Pagnotta. Anthony, how's it going, buddy?
It is going pretty well. This is the second time that we have tried to record this podcast, so let's see if we can actually get this done, because I am excited to get my opinions about this Tar Heel basketball team out there, because this is probably the first time since the Notre Dame game that there are actually really positive things to talk about with this basketball team. So I'm encouraged to get this out there. It's just, will the technology gods let this get out to the people?
Yeah, technology has not been kind to us the past couple of times we have tried recording first edition of the podcast, but we're going to power through it. And look, Carolina, the last time we saw them play was a little over a week ago out in Las Vegas. They scrapped their way to a 74-64 win. And they left the West Coast trip with as much of a positive feeling as they've probably had since the Bahamas. Of course, they lost to Gonzaga, but they showed some signs of life in certain areas. They scored over 80 for the first time, and then they won the game against UCLA. And a lot of those positive feelings were because of the play of freshmen Jeremiah Francis and Anthony Harris, both guys coming off the bench and providing their life is really the best way to put it. They've injected new life into this team. The offense has more identity. It's got more rhythm. There's more activity with those guys on the floor, and they really seem to kind of announce themselves that they're going to be a big part of this team moving forward. And so as they transition into tonight's game, I think that's where all the focus is going to be on, is can those two guys continue to progress? They're both coming back from injuries that caused them to miss the start of the year. But now, with the injury of Cole Anthony, they're playing big roles for Carolina.
Well, you said that this is the best that we felt about this team since they came back from the Bahamas. I'm going to be real honest. I think that right now I feel better about them than when they came back from their trip to Atlantis. I'm going to be honest with you. I am really encouraged by what I saw from the two freshmen. And these are guys that are not just one-and-done guys. These are guys that are going to be in the program for a while. And so I know that we're tempering our expectations a little bit, knowing what both of these guys have been through, especially Jeremiah Francis. So they might be held on a little bit of a different standard than a five-star guy in Cole Anthony and a five-star guy in Armando Bacot. But what we've seen from them so far is very, very encouraging and has to have people feeling confident that this team will at least be competitive and is not going to struggle to score the ball like they did in games against Ohio State and Virginia. Granted, the two best at the time defensive efficiency teams in the country. But I think these guys gave you a lot of hope because when the trip started out in Spokane, before they took the court that night, we were pretty much asking ourselves, how bad of a bloodbath is this going to be? This could get really bad really quick. And it really didn't. They held themselves in the game for a while. Gonzaga made that run that we've seen every team pretty much do at the start of second halves, and that's something that they still have to get corrected. Just because these freshmen are playing well doesn't mean they've got everything figured out, and that's one of the aspects they've got to figure out. But yeah, I think right now there has to be a lot of confidence about this young group that you've got in place. And you mentioned Jeremiah Francis and Anthony Harris. Maybe it's because he's been a starter all year and maybe just people are expecting a little bit more overall, but you got to be encouraged as well by what you saw from Armando Bacot, who, we're going to ask for a little more consistency from, but right now the freshmen have to have you feeling pretty good about this Carolina team as we go into a stretch that is going to produce some winnable games, and that starts tonight against Yale.
Yeah, we stress how important, if you got to win it against UCLA, what it meant. It kept you above 500, so you're still trending above water.
Mm-hmm.
But you get 9 days in between games. You get to go home, see your family. You get a chance to get a couple guys more healthy, mainly Bacot, who's still working back from the ankle injury suffered against Ohio State. But your next 4 games are at home. You've got the game against Yale tonight, and then you've got your first 3 ACC games of the new year will be all in the Smith Center against teams that, even without Cole Anthony, you still should beat, because the bottom of the ACC this year is very weak, as in years past there's been depth even at the bottom of the league. And they got that. They were able to get some positive momentum from the UCLA win. You saw Roy Williams just kind of, he was happy for the guys because, it's not like this team was losing and not caring. It was clearly frustrating to Brandon Robinson, Garrison Brooks, that they weren't winning basketball games the way that they've been accustomed to their time on campus. But it's a long season, and college basketball is wide open. That means the bubble is going to be extremely weak. You figure you get to 500 in the ACC, the NCAA will probably put you in because of the name on the front of your jersey. So, but let's focus on tonight's game against Yale. And Yale is no pushover. This is going to be a test for Carolina. The Bulldogs come in with a 10-3 record. James Jones has done a pretty remarkable job at the Ivy League school. This is a program that's been in the NCAA tournament the past couple of years. They've played Duke. They've played Baylor extremely tough in March Madness. And they come in 10-3 record, winners of 7 in a row. Their last game they won on the road at Clemson, albeit Clemson's not a world beater in basketball, but they're going to be comfortable competing in an ACC-type environment. And with all the upsets we've seen in college basketball all year, including Carolina losing at home to Wofford, they'll come in extremely confident and expected to compete against the Tar Heels.
Yeah, look, two out of the last 4 years, this team has made the NCAA tournament, and this year looks really no different. They are as battle-tested as just about any of the mid-major opponents that the Tar Heels are going to face this year. You talked about that game against Clemson that they won. They also have wins over a Vermont team that is also a mid-major, but you remember early in the year gave Virginia a fit in their place at Paul Jones Arena, and is expected to win the American Conference. They almost found a way to upset a Penn State team that many people think is on the rise and could make the NCAA tournament. They also, played a close game against Oklahoma State. So this team has played a lot of really good opponents early in the season, and for the most part, they fared pretty well. So you're right. This is not going to be a team that's going to be afraid. Carolina is probably the most talented overall team that they've played, but let's be real honest, even though Carolina is talented, there's been times this year where they just really haven't played up to that talent level. And, this is another game where if they come in with the mindset of we should win this game without much issue, they could be in trouble. But, you look at what this team is pretty much made of. They're going to be another team that's going to go through their big man, Paul Atkinson, 6'10". Again, not huge, but we've talked about that a lot with some of the teams that Carolina's faced so far this year, and they've still been able to find inside scoring. But he's averaging 17.2 a game, 7 rebounds a game. Also, one of the guys that you mentioned when we were doing the podcast earlier today, Jordan Bruner, a guy that is averaging 11.9 and 9.2, so nearly a double-double. So there is some talent on this team. And, the fact that they have tournament experience in the past means they've played some of these bigger opponents. So that kind of pays off in games like this. Granted, there are different guys that are on the team, but this is not going to be an easy test, like you said. But at the same time, this is one of those games where if you win for Carolina, this is not one that you're going to put on your resume and say, okay, this is the reason that we should be in the NCAA tournament. But you would believe that this is one of those games that if you win, it gives you a little more confidence because, yes, Yale is a legitimate basketball team and a team that very well could be playing in March. So I think Carolina's faced with a tough test, but the fact of the matter is that they got a week off and change to work on some of the things that they were, continually struggling with there early in the season. And I really feel like this team had a chance to focus on themselves for the first time really all season. And I think that's really going to pay dividends for them. I'm encouraged to see what they do. It'll be interesting to see if they come out a little bit slow because of the layoff or if they come out quick. So, but other than that, this is a game where it's kind of a measuring stick about where your hype level should be after that UCLA game, because the thing about UCLA was a good win for the Tar Heels, but that UCLA team turned around and lost to Cal State Fullerton. So, the question is, how good of a win actually was that? I think this will go a long way to proving whether or not the Tar Heels are actually making a little bit of a push as they get into ACC play.
Yeah, look, you hear coaches all the time talk about, we got to worry about us, and they use all those cliche coach speaks that we love to make fun of. But in the realest sense, Carolina just needs to really focus on who they are and what they're trying to accomplish, and let everything just take care of itself. When they played their brand of basketball, and you saw glimpses of that in the game at Gonzaga, you saw glimpses of that against UCLA, you saw a team that, despite all the injuries, there's enough there that can compete in your conference and then nationally. And that's the thing. It's the way college basketball is, because there's no dominant teams this year. Mm-hmm. Good teams are going to be good enough to compete. And look, Carolina's not. They're not going to be great this year. But if they can just get to playing good basketball, then they've got a chance to still make something out of a year that a couple weeks ago we felt was all lost. And look, Yale's going to challenge them mainly on the defensive end. They only give about 62 points per game. A lot of that's because they play at a more deliberate pace. But it also means that they're getting stops. Their defensive rating is 23rd in college, or 22nd in college basketball. That's a pretty high marking for a mid-major program. And you understand when you play a game like Yale, or a team like Yale, that they're going to do things that they have to do to compete. They're going to slow the game down. Mm-hmm. So Carolina's got to be a little bit more efficient in their half-court offense. They're going to take the three-point shot, and they're going to make the three-point shot. And you saw Wofford really thrive in that category. They were 14 of 40 from three. A lot of times you'll take that because those 26 misses normally lead to a lot of runouts. At this particular time, Carolina has not yet started thriving off of long shots turning into easy transition points. You've started seeing that creep up with more of Jeremiah Francis and Anthony Harris on the court. But this isn't a game where Carolina's offense cannot be in any sort of rhythm. They can't afford to take bad shots, because if they find themselves down an 8 to 10 point hole, that's going to be hard to crawl back out of.
Yeah, especially with the limited possessions. And one of the ways that Carolina can do that is really getting the ball